Nobody's born incredible. People who do incredible things simply took the right steps. This is our journey. This is the hunt for incredible. Today we're in the studio with a very special guest and good friend of mine, Aubrey Ennis. Aubrey is a commercial real estate operator who acquired $180 million worth of real estate within his first 3 years from buying multifamilies and hospitals. Now, this is the first of 2 episodes where we talk about his journey of how he acquired his first multi-million-dollar deal, scaled it, and the principles he lives by that enabled him to do it. In the next episode, we'll dive into how he would do it all over again with no money and no connections, so be sure not to miss that one. All right, without further ado, here's my conversation with Aubrey Ennis. Aubrey, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
All right, so I want to kick things off with some context as to how bonkers what you did actually was. So you acquired $180 million worth of real estate within your first 3 years of really diving into it. I can empathize with how bonkers that is because Jackie and I, we just bought a fourplex worth about $500,000 as an investment property that we flipped, and that took us a few months. So actually comparing that to $180 million within the first 3 years is really puts things into perspective for us especially, which is absolutely insane. So can you chat more about what strategy and approach you leveraged to really ramp up that scale?
Yeah, so I mean, I'd say it was definitely on the relationships more than anything, and doing your homework on when you're going out to find larger deals and go and do multiple deals again and again. It's this programmatic relationship that I think we were definitely after, and so really kind of where that started was reaching out to as many people as I possibly could in my market, figuring out what they're doing, what they like, what kind of deals that they were interested in doing, what would make them interested in meeting with me. And then when I wasn't doing that, I was studying the physical deal structures and how to put the stuff together so that, when you finally do land the meeting with the right person that, you're going to go do a deal with, you don't sound like an idiot and, blow the whole thing. So I'd say alongside the study and just reaching out is, we've talked on it before, is I'll take a page out of Cardone's book. It's just the massive action. It was, absolute, I don't know if I would call it a red line. It absolutely was just an absolute red line for like 3 years of, sleep deprivation. Some people can argue is a bad thing, but when you're first getting started out, there's not really a balance I think that a lot of people are looking for. It very much wasn't unbalanced. It took me, it took friends, mentors, family, people looking at me thinking I was crazy, and just pushing through that every single day as hard and as fast as you possibly can. But while it's hard and fast, it's also very careful and calculated. You can't, especially when you're gambling with other people's days, time, money, you got to be very mindful of those things.
Yeah. So there are a ton of super cool things to tease out there. Massive action is super important. I think something else that you do really well, which you kind of touched on already, is the right type of action, right? So how are you applying yourself? I think a lot of people, sometimes they'll do a lot of busy work and they'll feel like they're moving, but they're actually not going anywhere. Maybe they're investing a bunch of time, more time than they need to, planning or what have you, and they're just consumed with work without actually moving that needle effectively. Can you share the story that you shared with me previously? Because I feel like it, even though it's outside of the real estate, it still touches on this really well of taking action, but putting yourself out there and just being really bold and confident about that car that you had that was broken down, and then you ended up going and swapping it out.
I think you got to really kind of take a look at where you're at in life. I was in college when, I've really started going at this, and so the massive action there was while I was majoring and I was finishing my degree, and I was looking into, my anesthesia classes and trying to do clinicals at the hospital and things like that. When I wasn't doing that, I was reading real estate books. I was reading stock books. I was reading, I even went into venture capital books and things like that. I started learning the financial landscape, and it took me to 3, 4, 5 o'clock in the morning, and several all-nighters, what have you, and just pushing through and trying to learn. But that kind of goes to picking your strategy. I picked real estate. It was something I knew, something that I'd grown up around. I had seen both sides of it, both, what it looked like to work in it, versus, I've met several operators throughout my market. But kind of fast forwarding to the car story was I'd finished college, and I was going down I'd gotten a CFO position to work for, it was a friend of mine who started a roofing company. And so we were in college and, gosh, maybe even high school, we went and chased some storms. And I had chased storms with these group of guys, and we'd go to Colorado, or we'd go throughout different places throughout the U.S. And it was just a good, go learn how to sell, go be uncomfortable, go try something, just learn stuff, and obviously, try and go make some money. And one of those guys had ended up starting his own company, and he was out in the middle of absolute nowhere, Texas. It's in Hyco, Texas. And he was like, "Hey, I need help running the books. I need a CFO." And I was like, I'm fresh out of college in anesthesia, but I said, "Yeah, okay, I've learned enough about financials. Sure, I can go do this." One of those kind of bold, taking a swings, trying something new. But when I was driving back and forth for the first couple of months, I had this little Mazda hatchback, and it was definitely on its last legs. And finally, I was coming down to go meet this guy, and I'd accepted the job, and he's going to pay me X amount of dollars for the next 12 months. And car started smoking on the highway. And I was like, I'm not going to be able to drive. I might not make it to where I'm going. So literally pulled off, went to a Mercedes dealership, and, just being young and naive, thinking I need something shiny, pulled right in and walked into the dealership. I said, "Hey, somebody's going to make me a deal today, because I can't drive this car out of here." And I set the keys on the table, and we started running the paperwork for it right there. So, that was the Mercedes story.
Yeah, and you got that from actually showing them, "Hey, look, I'm the CFO of this company."
Yeah, so that goes to maybe another side of it, is the leverage side of it.
Yeah.
So I had typed my offer contract, and it was obviously approved by him. But walked in the dealership. I said, "Hey, here's what I'm going to be making for the next 12 months. Coming out of college, I didn't have much to my name at that time. But I was like, this is where I'm going." And the story was powerful enough that they were like, "Okay, that's good enough for me." And I mean, just basically sold them on the idea. Now, turned out well. But yeah.
That's such a cool story of something like a micro example of what it looks like to build a connection in one area and then leverage that connection for something bigger. Right. It's almost like that show on TV, like the bartering
absolutely.
show where
Sure.
people start off with something small, and then by the end of it, they bar their way up to a boat or whatever.
I had a friend of mine that did that in school. He started with it's like a POS car, and he sold bikes. He did it over and over and over again. Sold cars. Built himself up to a Corvette when we were like 17. But anyways,
dude, that's awesome. Yeah, and it's the exact same thing where you're like, well, first of all, you say yes before you actually jump, right? You're like, "Oh, CFO, yeah, I could do that." You weren't like, "Oh, well, I haven't, I don't have a degree in finance, so I don't know, I better not." You're like, "Yeah, I can do that," and then you figure it out as you go, and then you take that contract and you go to the car dealership and you say, "Hey, look at this thing. I'm a CFO.
Yes.
Can you give me the car?" Yes. That actually reminds me of a story that we were touching on earlier, where my dad, so he started off with absolutely nothing, and there was one day he went to this embroidery shop that did custom embroideries on polos.
Sure.
And he saw that the lady kept having to turn people away because they were there wanting it as a Christmas gift, and the turnaround time wasn't quick enough because they would ship them over to Houston. My dad lived in San Antonio at the time. They would ship it over to Houston. And so the turnaround time was too slow for these people who were doing it for Christmas. And so my dad, he'd want it, and he's super bold like you. I mean, your story reminds me so much of him, where I'm like, oh man, this is epic. And he went up to the lady and he said, "I noticed your turnaround time's pretty slow." And he had done the math on how much money they were losing from the people walking out in just like the hour that he was sitting there observing this thing. And he said, "I can have it turned around within 24 hours. And he didn't know very much about embroidery, but he figured like, oh, how hard could it be? He didn't have any machines, any money. He had maybe like $50 to his name. This was like 40 years ago, so $50 might have been worth, I don't know, like $150 today or something.
Sure.
And he ended up saying like, "Who owns this place?" And he talked to that guy and basically ran the numbers, made the sale to that guy who was willing to print all the stuff, right? So he had that contract. And then he ended up spending his money on a one-way flight to, oh, actually, no, take it back. The guy who owned the place lived a flight away. So he took a flight out there, got the contract, and then asked the guy for a down payment so he could afford a flight back, because he had spent all of his money on a one-way flight So he got the down payment. It was like 25% down or something. Got that money, bought it, flew back, went to the manufacturer of these machines that did the embroideries, and basically said, hey, I have this letter of intent. Can I have a machine? They said, we don't have any in stock. And he said, what about that one on the showroom floor? And they said, all right, we'll give it to you. So they give him the showroom floor one. And then he goes to a different embroidery company, and he asked around and said, who are the top like 8 people who know how to run these machines? And he told them, and he offered them double what they were making there. And then he was running the business out of his house. My parents describe it as there were boxes filled to the ceiling inside the house, and you could only walk around the house with basically like the empty spaces. Like there were like trails throughout the house and boxes everywhere else. And these 18-wheelers pulling up in this like ghetto area, and they're just unloading boxes inside the house.
Like, what is going on?
Yeah, and that's how he got it kicked off, was selling one person and then taking that relationship to sell to the other person, right? And that's the leverage that you talk about. Something else that I want to tease on, I really want to dive more into your backstory, but I feel like this is a good segue because you've done it so well, of identifying valuable relationships that people who you can work with to actually end up scaling up, that we've talked about, right?
Sure.
So what did your journey look like in terms of starting out from nothing? You don't know anybody. You know that you want to get into real estate. What were your first few steps moving forward in terms of thinking about the right relationships and actually getting connected with those people?
I think this is probably a good point to touch on. It's really the first hospital that I was looking at. So when I was in college and I was running clinicals, I finally met the doctors that owned the heart hospital that I was running clinicals out of. And we just got to talking, and I'd always kind of, at that time, I knew that I was trying to figure out how to get into real estate, and I hadn't picked my strategy per se at that time. I was just studying as much as I could and trying to figure it out. So talked to the doctors that ended up owning the hospital, and they were like, well, we own the hospital and we also own the operating business inside. And I was like, you can do that? And they said, well, yeah, you can sure do a lot with real estate. And I said, interesting. So you guys actually, it's 2 separate pieces. And they're like, yeah, it's the shell is one piece, the building is one piece, and then the business, the tenant inside, is another piece. And I was like, wow, okay. That really kind of, going back into class, there on Monday, I couldn't focus at all. I was like, these guys bought the building that I'm running clinicals out of, and that's an option. Okay. So I think that kind of started my, we've talked before on picking your Pokemon. That was kind of it. I was like, all right, I'm going to figure out how to go buy a hospital. Surely there's got to be, it doesn't have to be a massive regional deal, but I can go find, I know enough about it. I can kind of combine prior knowledge with the real estate I'm trying to get into, and find a nice, net lease deal. And we can talk more on net lease if you want, but so.
For anybody who doesn't know what net lease is, in 15 seconds, what does that sound like?
Yeah, so there's different forms of a net lease. There's single net, double net, triple net lease, absolute net lease. Today we go after absolute net leases. It's basically levels of what the tenant is responsible for. So an absolute net lease, the tenant is responsible for everything, including insurance and taxes, which is a big deal. So you are the landlord of the shell itself. And so it's kind of more, it's almost like a blend of stock investing, I feel like, at that point, because you're really vetting the credit of the company that's inside, rather than, alongside the shell, yes, but it's going to the lenders, going to the equity guys. They're looking at the credit of that tenant when you get to that level. But going down to a single net lease, it's basically, maybe I'm responsible for roof structure. I'm responsible for the concrete outside. I'm responsible for X amount of dollars on the building if something goes wrong, something like that. So different forms of leases. And that was before I ever got into multifamily, but we'll go into that in a bit. I was in college at the time, met the doctors, started looking at different hospitals around, started calling brokers. And really, at that point, I was just reaching out to anybody and everybody I could possibly find. It was around me. I was hitting people up on LinkedIn, strangers, man, just anyone I could find, talking to teachers, professors. Hey, can you help me meet this person? They're looking at me like, hey, why are you not focused on your studies? And I'm like, I'm trying to figure out how to buy one of these buildings. And they're like, well, it's not a terrible idea. Okay, yeah, maybe I can help you out. I even met a couple of the professors. I met their husbands, or I met their wives, or whatever, that happened to be, maybe they were GCs or superintendents, or they were in some form of construction or whatever. And, I met everybody from garbage men to operators to superintendents to other GCs. And then I came across a couple of the bigger guys. I had identified a deal out in Tulsa, and I had some friends that, I was about 6 months, 8 months into it, and they had watched me. They wanted me to be successful, and they had people that they knew in their connections. They're like, well, maybe I'll go put them in front of somebody. Put me in front of a guy named, I don't know if we can, put me in front of a guy named Bill Scotchandler, and he was the president of IBC Bank in Oklahoma City. Not understanding at the time the level of a president of the bank, like who I was speaking to, definitely was like the 7th or 8th meeting that, I would have had. I should have started with a lower level analyst, but put me in front of him, and I was looking at a $12 million deal, and I walked in with my friend and had my suit on and everything else, and sat in his office, and he just kind of looked at me, and he was like, "You guys are young. What are you guys here for?" I was like, "I'm trying to buy this building." He goes, "This is a $12 million deal." And I said, "Yeah, it is." He goes, "You're going to ask me for $8 million on the first day that, we see each other for a loan?" I was like, "Yes, sir, I am." And he goes, "All right, well, what are you going to do? What are you going to do with it?" And I was like, "Well, I'll figure that out after I buy it." And he's like, "All right." And that was where the first conversation was like, "Here's your next 5 steps." And I was like, "Oh, okay, got it. And so that led to the next several guys that I talked to, and they were actually operators that were, within the market that I was in. Mm-hmm. One guy named Barry Dotson was very helpful to me. Great guy, preacher on the weekends. Looks terrifying if you've ever met the guy. He's like 6'6", probably 265, just nothing but muscle, bald head. I mean, massive dude, sweetest guy you'll ever meet. But he kind of took me under his wing and showed me, the ropes. Hey, here's what I've done. Here's the guys I've worked with. And he actually worked with a couple of the larger developers in Oklahoma City at the time that had built multifamily. And so kind of parallel to that, that was kind of the first brush in with multifamily, but I had still had my eyes on hospitals, reaching out. Finally found a broker out in Oklahoma City. He had a deal. It was Select Specialty. Didn't even know who they were at the time. Large operator, 100 locations throughout the U.S. Turns out, and it's more specific than that, it's 94 locations in the U.S., but out of their 94 locations, the Oklahoma City location is their number 1 performer in the country. I was like, I knew enough about cap rates and purchase price and things like that at the time. Went and made an offer on this thing. And the owner happened to be a friend's family friend. And I had talked to this guy for months about, hey, I'm really trying to figure out how to go buy a building and so on and so forth. And so, like, the circle got smaller. It was like when you start reaching out, I think, to all those people, the circle of players gets very, very tiny. And, like, the people who are actually moving, chess pieces on the board, it gets very small. And so words move quicker, pieces move faster. And honestly, it was just a matter of, you talk about strategy. I kissed, like, 10,000 frogs and then finally hit one person that was like, hey, I'm going to help you with your next 5-10 steps. Here's who you need to go talk to. And this is exactly what you need to do. It's like, oh, okay. Follow those, and it leads to the next 5-10, to the next 5-10. Finally, eventually, to the operators that are going to help you out and go get that first deal done.
Yeah. That's something that came up with the interview with Ryan. Was one of my favorite quotes: "Don't strike while the iron is hot. Make the iron hot from striking." Ooh. I don't remember who said that. Okay. We might have to throw that in the show notes later so I'm quoting it properly. But, yeah, so effectively it's don't wait for the right timing, right? Don't say, like, oh, well, if only I knew this person, or if only I knew that person. Or, oh, well, Aubrey, yeah, of course he did it because he met the right people. And it's like, no, you met the right people because you were striking the iron. You were reaching out to everybody you knew. And it's a numbers game, right? Like, you kiss enough frogs, you're going to find the prince.
It takes time.
And it takes time, right? And another one of my favorite quotes from Naval is, be patient with results but impatient with action. So you're impatient with action but still patient with the results to say, yeah, it takes time. Yeah, you have to reach out to a bunch of people. You have to get a bunch of no's. You have to be bold enough to walk into a place and say, hey, I'm going to buy this place. And the guy says, you two look young. What are you doing here? And just
the president of IBC, by the way.
Yeah.
Who's just going, how the hell did y'all get this meeting?
Totally. And I think the people at the top got there oftentimes because of their boldness walking into a room. And when they see somebody else who is young, bold walking into a room, not that you have to be young, But I do think that boldness gets you a long way of saying like, no, I'm going to risk looking foolish here. And then the worst thing that can happen is you end up exactly where you were had you not walked in there. The only thing is you missed out on an opportunity to potentially like escalate where you are in life and what you're trying to go for.
And I think a lot of it too was, something to be take a note on was presentable and just being put together. Like, I may not have known the asset management side of it for the next 5 years, but I came in, was respectful, manners. I mean, simple stuff, man. Like childhood stuff. Manners, put together well, shaved, suit. Like, go in there, hey, this is what I'm trying to do. Be very clear, very concise. No BS, because these guys have dealt with this for 20, 30 years. They know BS when they're presented with it. Mm-hmm. So, hey, this is what I'm trying to do. Help me get there, or tell me who, or this meeting is, adjourned at this point.
Look like somebody they want to give their money to.
Absolutely. Yeah. Or somebody they can build into somebody that they're going to want to, right? So.
Yeah. Okay, so then moving forward from there, so you built some momentum. Share a bit more about what the acquisition process looked like for that first hospital.
I'd say as far as even the massive action went, I went as far as I took a job at a brokerage. I went to Marcus & Millichap straight out of college. Nowhere near my degree field. And it was part of reaching out into people in the market. And I was like, what do I need to do? And they're like, do you know how to underwrite deals? And I was like, what do you mean? And they're like, oh, God, okay. I was like, all right, well, explain it to me. And, they would share with me their different underwriting models or whatnot. But they said, you need to figure out how to structure deals so that when you go and talk to whoever it is you're going to talk to, three main people. There's operators, there's lenders, and there's equity partners. And they're all going to know how to structure deals and how they play together with each other. And he's like, you've got to figure that out. Otherwise, you're going to lose someone's money, you're going to lose your money, or you're going to get sued. And I was like, okay, that's fair. Where do I go? And they're like, I would start at a big brokerage house, right? Kind of back to picking your Pokemon. They're like, what do you want to do? Do you want to be on the debt side? You want to be on the equity side? You want to be on the operator side? I was like, well, I think the operator side. I think the best operators turn into the best investors, right? Because they know kind of the whole process of putting everything. But anyways.
So I want to point something out. Was it more like you wanted to be the investor and you thought like, okay, what's the best stepping stone to actually become that best investor, which is
absolutely
via the operator?
Yep. I've always been the one that I eventually want to be the check writer, right? I want to be the bridge lender. I want to be, we can go into some details on that later, but in order to get there, especially if you don't have, a massive treasure chest sitting behind you in the beginning, you got to go build it yourself. And really the only route to do that is either brokerage of some form or be the operator. I thought brokerage was definitely the best way to. I picked Marcus & Millichap. They're a great shop. They're huge. They're global. The training was immaculate. I got a year of in-depth understanding on this is how you underwrite deals. This is how they're put together. Here's the players in the market. Here's the lenders. Here's the equity partners they do deals with. Here's the property management companies they work with. And so like all of those pieces, right, as soon as you get, here's a property management company they work with. All right, I'm going to their website. I'm calling the guys that run the shop. I'm going in, hey, what have you done for the last 15 years? How do you do it? And that took, that's back to the time. Meeting all the players, meeting all their pieces, learning how everything gets put together, and then being able to underwrite, being able to sit there and understand and, financial modeling and things like that when I didn't have a degree in it in the first place was definitely took some action there just to practice and learn your assumptions, learn your pieces. But that really led me into the acquisition side. It was about 10 months in, and there was another guy there at Marcus with me. I trained with him. His name was Jackson Russell, one of my partners today. And I said, hey, we got to figure out how to buy one of these. And at the same time, I was like, hey, I've been looking at this hospital. I'm going to go put an offer on this thing. And he said, yeah, let's do it. Because he was in office sales. And he was doing industrial sales and tenant leasing. And I was doing multifamily underwriting at the time. And I was like, all right, well, let's figure out how to go put this together. He said, okay. So put the offer on it. Go out. It's a 70,000 square foot building that we go and tour. And I'm touring with the operations manager and the facilities manager. And they're looking at us like, who the hell are these guys? They're not going to be able to buy this deal. They're not going to be able to close this. And at the time, we had raised like $1 million through just family and friends. Because stepping back a bit, when you go to go take down one of these bigger deals, you have to write a check up front. Now, it can be refundable, but they're going to expect some earnest money. And depending on the size of the deal, it's typically around 1%. So $100 million deal, they're going to want $1 million. It's a little more than that today. I mean, I've seen anywhere from, we did a $50 million deal, we did a $70 million deal. Those were about $750,000, $900,000 earnest checks that you got to go put up in the first place. I didn't have that in our pocket. I couldn't just go write them a check and be like, hey, if you need to cash this, the bank will clear it.
Yeah.
So we had to go raise that money, and that created it's an interesting deal structure that we put together up front to do that.
So then really quickly, that process is you have the capital for the earnest money. So basically, like, you want to buy a $100 million deal, and then you say, okay, 1% down in this in this example, it's $1 million, and that's basically just table stakes to say, hey, I'm legit. Let's go ahead and proceed to see if we can actually close on this thing.
It is the cost of buying yourself the due diligence period.
Cool.
Until the money goes hard. And that was like the money goes hard. It's not our money. It's like, you got to know you're buying that deal.
Yeah.
The debt's got to be lined out. You got to have everything squared away. And typically I've seen it anywhere from 10 days, 15 days, 30 days. I mean, if it's land, sometimes it's like 90 days, 100 days. But somewhere in there, you have X amount of days to do your due diligence. And it costs you to go put that up. But, yeah.
Okay. So you raise this amount from family, friends, and then you find the hospital, and you know that that's what you want to go for.
Yes. Next step, mortgage brokers. Totally different side of the game, right? There's real estate brokers, and then there's mortgage brokers. Mortgage brokers are guys that are going, and their job is to call every bank or lender, life co, what have you, that is around, that's somebody that does the financing you're looking for. And so, I mean, they might, a bigger deal, 50, 60, $100 million deal, you'll probably have 30 different bids, depending, from lenders from all around the country. Something smaller, I mean, the hospital, I think we had like 5 guys that came in. 3 of them were local, 2 of them were in Texas. That partially led me to Texas at that point. We had reached out for some help from one of the investors, and he was like, hey, I know a guy in Dallas. Let me introduce you to him. I think he can probably help you out on the debt side. I said, okay. So went and met him, introduced us to the mortgage brokers. They were out of Texas, and the mortgage brokers actually introduced us into our first co-general partners. So the guys that helped us close the deal, raise the cash, raise the equity bit, manage the deal after it's closed, so forth. The bigger operators that we could go and close the deal with. That was kind of the next big step.
Okay, so that's the next big step. And then previously you mentioned was it once you get past that option period that you started reaching out to everybody to find the rest of the cash?
Oh, no, I mean, I'd say we were reaching out for the rest of the cash even before I even knew it was the hospital. Yeah, absolutely. It's you're in an equity raise period. It's like, okay, I know that I'm going to need to go lock up one deal, call it $500,000, $750,000 to lock up something larger. And the hospital was about $20 million. I think it was like $18,225 was the purchase, and then all in it was like $21 million. So I knew I was going to need like $5, $6, $7 million somewhere in there, depending on the loan to value. So I was out asking for that way in advance. And I mean, you really have to people get nervous, I think, asking for cash, because that's what it is, right? When you raise an equity. But what they don't realize is there are hundreds of billions of dollars literally just sitting in pockets right now that are begging to be spent. Warren Buffett's got, 90-something billion sitting in cash because he can't find anything better to spend it on, because there's nothing returning the amount that the U.S. dollar is yielding right now, right? But if you can present that to somebody and structure a unique deal, they're not upset that you're asking for it. They're almost glad. It's like, okay, can you get this done? If you can, thank God. I'm trying to allocate X dollars by the end of the year, which I thought was kind of an interesting thing to learn. But
yeah. I'll never forget Brandon Turner with Bigger Pockets had a quote one time where he said, "The people who are pulling the right deals together are the hot girl at the bar."
Yes.
Like, don't be worried about being bashful of asking people for money. Just because you highly value your money because you haven't really made it yet doesn't mean that other people look at money the same way.
Absolutely.
And if you invest your time in educating yourself, like you were an obsessive learner with all this stuff, right?
Yep.
If you focus on your craft and really nailing down being able to find a good deal, when you find that good deal, the money will just come in, right? And it's not that easy, right? It's much easier said than done because you were
Sure.
striking the iron
Long time.
tremendously for
Yeah.
a long time to
Yeah.
get that iron hot. Can you share a bit more what it looked like to reach out and raise that money? What avenues did you pursue? What areas did you find you gained more traction in?
It took a year and a half to close that hospital. Something that should have been done in 90 days was a year and a half. Now, granted, I will say this: March of 2020 is when we put that under contract. So, the world kind of blew up with COVID right then at the same time, and everybody went inside, right? Which was just, especially all of the, a lot of the wealth is held with the older generation. Yeah, so the older generation all of a sudden just went inside and in their houses and stopped going out, stopped going to the office, stopped taking meetings for, it was a 90-day period of, hey, we're just going to rebalance the portfolios and make sure that we're square to weather whatever it is. And then they even started looking at that point. Like it was, the pause button just got hit. Well, we're under contract. Earnest money's in, due diligence, the clock has started. So that was its own difficulty. But as far as the equity raise, it was, I'd say it started with the mortgage brokers. Yet you got to put the debt together first, I think, at least in my mind.
So what does that look like, putting the debt together?
A ton of paperwork. I mean, it's the last deal we closed, there was probably 1,500 pages of loan documents that I went through and 47 separate attachments, and that was just the debt piece. And the debt piece very much correlates to the equity piece, right? So while it's kind of simultaneous, you at least have to know, because when you're going and talking to the equity, they're going to go, okay, what does the debt look like? When you go talk to the debt, they're going to look at you and go, okay, well, what do the equity terms look like? So it's very much bit kind of together,
Yeah.
but I very much think like you need a strong debt platform, a lender that is saying, hey, I'm going to close 65-70% of this, because you can then use that to go shape the equity terms and the cash flows that they need. As far as what it looks like, it was working with those brokers and then finally working with the banks and the other partners. We got to meet those other couple of co-GPs that they've done this for 20, 30 years. I'd say that's, if you're looking at doing a larger deal on one of the first swings, the bank and the equity guys both are going to look at your track record, and they're going to expect you to, it doesn't have to be crazy, but like they're either going to expect you to have somebody on board with you that has done this before and is going to ensure that the deal goes as planned, or you've done yourself 20 or 30 of these deals. They don't want to see a first deal that terrifies people. So maybe that was even before putting the debt together, you got to go secure the partner that's going to help you sign on it, right?
Yeah. And it sounds like that's the route that you went, right? Was securing that
Correct.
partner?
Yeah,
okay.
Absolutely.
So what did it look like to convince a partner that you were worth diving into with this?
About 3.5 months of driving back and forth to Dallas and meeting with these guys and calls with them and calls with the lender and them running due diligence on us. I mean, we ran, before even meeting them, just kind of back to that personal due diligence. I mean, we had very in-depth executive profiles run on us, background checks, bank statements, financials, anything you could possibly imagine. It's like, here's me, here's my family, here's where I was in kindergarten. They go back that far.
Wow.
And they want to know who you are. Is there any dirty laundry we need to know about? Are you going to get me sued or anything like that?
Mm-hmm.
And so, you got to say, hey, I'm a clean whistle. I'm put together. I've got an idea. I want to go big. I understand what it takes, and if it requires me to be on the phone at 4 a.m, I will be there, and I'll handle that. And it was really just, at that point, you're kind of, the deal sells itself, quote unquote, but it's you. Are you going to answer the phone? Are you going to put this together? What are the things that you've put together so far look like? Are you credible? Are you somebody I want to spend time on?
And were those relationships primarily built from working at that brokerage, or was that from reaching out to people and trying to, I guess, gain those connections via cold contact? Every
bit was cold contact.
Wow.
The brokerage really taught me it. I would say if I was in Dallas at the brokerage, I think it would have been a different story, but the Oklahoma brokerage is a much different.
Gotcha.
Oklahoma brokers are a lot smaller breed out there, if you will. There's just not a lot of deal volume, right? The growth in Oklahoma is 4 to 6% on good years. The growth in Dallas has been like 20%, 22%, 24%. There's 18 people moving here an hour.
Yeah.
So it's like there's a lot more people to talk to in Texas than there is in Oklahoma.
Yeah.
And I would say the people in Oklahoma, too, that we even met, not a lot of people like brokers. It's if you're a liked broker, it's because you get deals done. You're real, and you've been trusted for a long time with these guys. But a lot of them salesy, and it's just part of the game. But no, I'd say a lot of that came from just the outreach. You go and meet 100 guys that are dead ends, and then the 101st guy leads you to the next 5. They go and get the first deal done, kind of thing.
So what does getting those reps in look like in terms of, like, where do you actually go to cold call people? Is it messaging on platforms like LinkedIn? Is it calling up brokerages and seeing who you can get a hold of? What does that actionably look like?
Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube comments, cold call in the newspaper, knowing who people are in your. I went and knocked on office doors. There was a president of a larger brokerage that I knew was also a developer in Oklahoma, and I knew exactly who he worked with and who his partners were. And I went and knocked on their doors, and very interesting too. You walk in those doors and you get through the front door, but you're met very quickly by people at that door. Who are you here to see? Why are you here? What, so on, so on, so forth. It's like, I'd like to see Mr. So-and-so. And they're like, do you have an appointment? No. Okay, please exit the building. It's like, okay, all right, I'll be back.
Not even schedule a time. It's just like leave.
No. Very, very private individuals that they're about their business.
Yeah.
But stuff like that, yeah. And I think it's, what is that saying? It's back to the massive action, but luck is where opportunity meets preparedness or something.
Yeah.
Okay, so like 3 weeks ago, I was in a FedEx at 9 a.m. I was getting my passport photos taken. I just walked in the door, sitting there waiting about 9 o'clock, and so guy next to me, and he was waiting for something too. And doors open, walk in. Hey, do you guys do passport photos? Yeah, okay. I said, all right. And they said, step over here. Guy over in the corner, he's like, where are you going? Guys are chatting. It's like, I'm going here and here. I'm trying to get over to, Austria, and I want to see parts of Denmark. And it's like, oh, that's pretty exotic. What do you do? I was like, oh, I do real estate acquisitions, and I bought my first few deals and so on. And I was like, what do you do? He's like, oh, well, do you know so-and-so? I was like, yeah, they're one of the largest developers in Texas. And he was like, yeah, we bring all the equity to them. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. Could we have lunch, please? And he was like, yeah, absolutely. Let's go grab lunch. And we just got talking. And then, sure enough, went and had lunch with him and 2 of his other partners like 2 weeks ago, and they've already shown me. I looked at a deal in New Braunfels with them that was probably $65 million deal. And they're looking now at us bringing $15 million into that project to go and partner with them on. But stuff like that. It was just, people say, oh, he's in the right place at the right time. And I think it's just a matter of I'm up every day, hauling ass all the time, all over the state of Texas, and eventually it's just a numbers game. You're going to run into somebody that, kind of back to the circle, is smaller and smaller and smaller, right?
Yeah.
And they don't care where you came from. They don't care. There's certain cliques in Dallas, I'd say, that exist, but outside of that, they want to know that, who are you? What are you doing? Here's what I'm doing. And if you can bring value to me, do it professionally, and don't bother me, get it done, like, they'll go do deals with you.
Yeah. So you've mentioned a handful of times a concept that I absolutely love of picking your Pokemon. Can you elaborate a bit more on what that means?
I think, so I've got some friends that they keep trying to come to me. They're like, oh, I want to do this. And then the next week it's, I want to do this. And then the next week, I want to do this. I want to do this. I think I started with that. And I was, back to like when I was in college, I was reading all the different books. Well, I finally picked real estate. It's like, in the old Pokemon game, when you start the game, you either pick the green one, the blue one, the red one, and that shapes the whole game, right? That's where you start. That's your guy that you go build. Well, it's very much the same thing. I picked real estate, and then from real estate, you have, all right, do I want to be the operator? Do I want to be on the debt side? Do I want to be on the equity side? 'Cause you could start anywhere. I think it really just goes to personal preference. I think it's position in life, and then just what you're passionate about. I like the operator side for a multitude of reasons, but I also like the control that it gives me. On any kind of the lending or the equity side, you have no control because it's ultimately in the operator's hands on if they're going to go and get the job done. And as the operator, I know that I will stay up till 5 in the morning if it means, fixing a minute piece of a deal that makes the investor return better. But anyways, back to, so I picked the operator side. And then from the operator side, you kind of pick again, right? It's okay, well, do I want to do net lease deals? Do I want to do multifamily deals? Do I want to buy industrial deals? Do I want to do ground up? Do I want to do rehabs? Do what level of, am I going core plus? Am I going so on and so forth? And you kind of pick deeper and deeper until you really shape your scope. You shape your strategy of what you're going after. And that, I found that when I picked one direction and I just started pounding the pavement every day to go get that first deal done, I got the first deal done. And then it was that first deal led to the next couple, which led to the next couple, which are now leading into, I'm looking at, a pipeline of 20 in front of me that are all, these are not searching for deals. These are like, now I've developed sponsor relationships, right? Other sponsors that are doing deals that need help in various ways. Maybe they need equity raised, or maybe they're looking for someone to put the debt together for them, or maybe they need acquisition director to go in and shape deals. And for that, they'll cut you equity ownership, cut you fees. I mean, you can make money, you can make your career out of that, but kind of for me personally, I want to see it all. So it's as much as I can possibly do in as many different fields of real estate, right? Of my Pokemon. That's what I want to do. And then it'll branch after that. But
so you mentioned, so we've touched on this a handful of times, striking the iron to make it hot, and how the fruit of your labor did take a while to be realized. What gave you the confidence that if you were persistent in this game of real estate, that it would actually generate the results you needed, as opposed to what it sounds like a handful of your friends have, which is that shiny object syndrome, right? Where they start working on something and then they jump to something else, trying to, basically they think that changing up your strategy and those micro pivots, you can turn it this way a little bit. Those micro pivots might give them a better chance, but you saw that the pivots were actually going to take you off course. You needed to stay straight. What were you looking at that helped you understand, okay, if I stick with this, then I'm going to make it? Because a quick caveat is, like they say the definition of insanity is doing the same thing and expecting different results. Mm-hmm. But realistically, that is the thing you need to do sometimes, right? Is you need to do the same thing, because there are certain things in life that it's getting your reps in and continuing to grind with the same thing that over a period of time will generate the results that you're looking for. Sure. So how do you distinguish between those two things? How do you distinguish, okay, this is an instance where I look insane because I'm doing the same thing and the results aren't showing up, right? I'm cold calling people. I'm trying to raise money. It's hard to get people to give me money because I'm new and all this stuff, and I don't actually have the track record yet and all that, versus, okay, maybe I should not be insane and I should pivot somewhere else.
I think a lot of different places. I think one good place was education, for one. Listening to the guys that had started in the exact same spots. I mean, Cardone was a great spot. I mean, a lot of people have a lot of different views of that guy. But, I mean, Uncle G was one of my favorites for a long time. I mean, he just screamed, go out there and go for it, I mean, I think that was kind of his whole underlying message. And seeing what he was able to build, I think he started, he didn't really start making money until he was in his 50s, right? So it's kind of one thing that I saw was, okay, at my age, starting this out, I was 25, or I was like 23, 24 when I really started looking at it. And it's like, I can fail every single year for almost a decade, and I'll barely be over 30.
Right.
So that was kind of a big piece. It was really just, I knew that in the back of my head, and then that was reinforced by a couple of my first mentors. There was one guy in particular. He was just batty as all hell, to be honest. But he looked me in the face one night. We were having dinner and drinks with a couple of his partners. And he was like, Aubrey, I want you to be absolutely reckless. I just want you to go and just be reckless as hell. Just go get into anything and everything you possibly can. Skin your knees, fall down, bust your teeth in. Don't get sued. Don't catastrophically, screw up. But just go. I was like, okay. So I did that. I started really, and I did. I skinned my knees enough to kind of, it gave me that stability, right? Of all right, I know what I can and can't do. I kind of learn the boundaries. Another mentor was passed on a speak in absolutes. Because I noticed that I've got that written on my wall. It's just to remember every day, speak in absolutes, because nobody wants, maybe this is going to happen, you only speak in, hey, I have done this today. This got done. You don't go, oh, well, I'll get it done next week, or I'll go do this in 3 days, or you should have this 30 days from now. It's you only talk to those guys when it's, hey, I've got this done. I finished it yesterday. It's so on. But back to what you were saying. A couple of the mentors, like I said, that I had personal to me, started in similar places, and I saw where they were at. I saw how long it took, and it took them 10, 12, 15 years, some of them, and I saw how far it already kind of come in just a year and a half, 2 years, and so I was comfortable with that timeline. I married the time it was going to take me to do this. I knew that I signed up for a 20, 30-year game, and I was fine with that. And I knew that I might fail in there, but as long as you avoided catastrophic failures, you listened to people around you that, frankly, just knew more than you or had done it before, that probably going to work out in the end. And I mean, it was just, there's enough literature out there and people talking about it to say, okay, if I do X for long enough, then your result will be Y. Even if you do poorly and you start here, here's where you're in goal, but here's kind of the next milestone you need to be hitting. That was kind of how I kept my sanity, I guess.
Yeah. There are so many directions we could go from there.
Yeah.
So many things I want to tease out. It's always it hurts my soul to have to only pick one, hoping that we'll maybe have time to get to the others. I want to revisit the idea of speaking in absolutes, because I think that's incredibly powerful, right? Because if you are talking about what you're going to do too frequently, then you become that going to do person who every time you tell them you're going to do something, they just accept that you're just blowing hot air, whatever it is. So can you elaborate more discreetly, what is speaking in absolutes? How do you view it, and how do you actually apply it?
I think a lot of it really relates to the money raise side of it, the equity raise and the debt side of it. They have a lot of questions. The bank has a ton of questions. The equity partners have a ton of questions. I closed those apartments in Dallas I was telling you about. That was a $22,889,000 check that they wrote us. I went through like 6 months of questions until I got that check written, so we go close that. And they're out of Israel, so they're 8 hours ahead, which means I was answering questions at 2 or 3 in the morning, and it was the afternoon for them or whatever it was over there. But when they're asking, hey, I think the mind has a tendency to just, when it gets nervous, it defaults to a quick answer, especially when they're asking something that you may not truly know. It's like I remember one because it was for that equity partner. They asked me something about the window joints, and they're like, hey, does it have a flashing here, here, and here, and is it caulked with this, this, and this? And I was like, yes, it is. That's fine. And it just kind of came out. And I wasn't thinking about it. It was not. Okay, that was about $102,000 that I had to go and then contract out to go and fix that, and then I had to go and tell them, hey, this was actually this, this, and this, because at the end of the day, it's all coming back to the numbers. Like, every single thing that occurs in a deal will be flushed out on the settlement statement, period. So I think that is probably one of the most important things that I've learned alongside speaking in absolutes is know your numbers. Got that from another one of my current mentors and partners, who just loves to grill the ever-loving shit out of me about the settlement statement. I mean, we'll go rounds and rounds and rounds. The guy's in his 50s, 60s, and we're sitting there at 9:30 at night going through numbers on an Excel sheet, and he's like, you have to know this. And I get it. It's because it all comes out when you don't speak to in that absolute of, if you blow a little smoke, whether or not, however big or small it is, like, it will be flushed out. And it damages credibility, damages the relationship. At the end of the day, that was something extremely minor, but I think that's give you an idea of the scale that these people deal with. $100,000 was something minor to them as far as a contracting issue, but those kinds of things, and just doing as you say you're going to do is very important. A lot, especially to the older guys. I mean, they've been through it and they've done it for 30 years. Kind of back to the no bullshit. They'll look you straight in the face and it's like, hey, are you going to do X, Y, Z? Yes, I'm going to do X, Y, Z on this date. If you don't do it on that date, they remember. They absolutely remember, even if you think, oh, they probably just forgot. It's fine. It can be pushed till Monday. Your credibility just notched from 100 to 99.
Yeah.
And that builds up over time.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean that's something that I can deeply relate to. I very much try to live by the motto of don't tell people what you're going to do, show them what you've done.
Yep.
Right? Like even this podcast, I haven't told very many people that I'm going to do it.
Yeah.
The only people I've shared with are people if I'm like actually working to pull it together.
Yep.
And then I'll tell people like, oh yeah, I'm driving up to Dallas this DFW this weekend because we're going to shoot the first episode of this podcast I'm putting together. And people are like, oh wow.
Yeah.
Because it's like this is actually a thing that is happening and in place.
Yep.
And then you become branded as that person who's actually doing things as opposed to that person who quote unquote is on their way to do something that may or may not end up happening.
Sure. I think personal relationships too, very much important in speaking in absolutes. I mean, down to, my family and loved ones around me, Mandy. I mean, it's I think it's easy when you're talking to them because it's almost like they're not business partners. They're not equity partners. They're not strangers. They're people you love and want to support you. And so it's easy to go and tell them, hey, I'm doing this deal. I'm doing so on and so forth. I think, we'll be able to do this, and this, and so forth. And then when a lot of deals blow up, a lot of deals don't go through. I mean, I had to look to go get that first deal done. I mean, I looked at a whole lot more than just that. I probably looked at, 100 plus deals just to do the first. And over the last, 5 or 6 that I've done, I've probably looked at, 1,000, maybe 2,000 deals to get those couple done. And some of those were even under contract that fell out, blew out, didn't work out. I mean, on both the sell and buy side. And so when that happens and you get, I think it's more the excitement with the loved ones. It's like, hey, I've got this deal under contract, right? They're like, oh shit. They get all pumped up. Whatever happens, the rate blows out. The Fed hikes and, the loan blows up the deal or whatever. And you have to go and you're like, hey, lost that deal. That's a big blow to family and personal relationships, I've noticed. So it's easier to just kind of keep a level head and keep a level expectations, controlling expectations. Very important, especially with just family relationships. I get asked a lot of questions from them and friends, and it's like, yeah, no, things are going well. They're not going great. They're not going bad. It's going well. It's moving along as it should. And they're like, what does that mean? I'm like, it's moving along as it should. I'll let you know when the deal's done.
Yeah. So, until everything's closed,
yeah.
It's open-ended.
Yeah. Kind of one, I guess to touch on that is just wire transfers, right? It's a lot of people, speaking in absolute, a lot of people talk, but I've definitely learned that it's real when the money transfers. When you get the Fed reference number of the money going to the other account, that's when it's real. It's crazy. Signatures and wire transfers.
And like you touched on before, people log when other people can actually close and do what they say they're going to do or actually have done something, definitively.
Yeah.
Right? Like, even if people don't remember every instance, you build a brand as you go through life and you build a reputation that people subconsciously and emotionally store as you being that type of person. Even if they don't remember the events that led to them feeling that about you, you still develop that brand as you go through life. So make sure that everything that is associated with your brand is something that makes people want to pull you to the top.
Yeah. I mean, and I think be careful who you burn out. I burned out a mentor. Sweet guy, honestly, just wanted nothing but the best for us. But he's probably coming up on 80, and I think he thought we were a little further along in the beginning than we were. And so the cost of that education, of him telling us and kind of him hopping back, he's basically retired at that point, but him having to come back into the game at the level that he did to make sure that the things we were doing went smoothly, I think it's a little more than he intended to bite off, and it hurt the relationship at the end of it. It was, I think, kind of back to that control expectations, be very open, speak in absolutes, and be very clear on where you're at, what you know, what you're trying to do, and what you have around you to go get it done. Because it's stressful.
Yeah. No, 100%.